Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. For those who are coming in from the waiting room, we're just going to give it another minute or two as more folks join us, and then we're going to start the conversation. Good morning. Nice to see everyone. I'm going to give it one more minute, and then I'm going to kick us off here. Hey, let's get started. Thank you all so much for joining One Neighborhood Builders for our monthly Fresh Fridays series. My name is Grace Evans-Pettigrew. I'm the Chief of Staff at One Neighborhood Builders. We launched this Fresh Fridays series over a year ago now to create space for practitioners, community members, policymakers, and all other folks who are interested in community development to learn and share together. So we're especially excited to discuss topics like that, which we will today, which is focused on participatory budgeting and its relationship with civic action. Before we get started, just a few notes on logistics for the day. So first, please note that we'll be recording this session. We intend to share it with folks who were not able to join us this morning and are interested in the conversation. Second, if you have any questions or comments while one of our panelists is speaking, please feel free to leave it in the chat. We'll try to incorporate it into the discussion. And then at the end, we'll also have a chance for open Q&A, at which point you folks can come off mute and take the floor and ask whatever questions they'd like. Third, if you hear a phrase or an acronym that you are not familiar with, we encourage you to ask a question or note that in the chat. My colleague, Ali Steinberg, will be watching the chat and will be ready to jump in to explain and translate if she's able. This is a space for learning, and we want to ensure it's as accessible as possible for everyone who's coming to this conversation. And fourth and finally, to that point, we also think of this as a space for connection. So we would love for everyone to take a moment and introduce themselves in the chat. Whatever you'd like to share, your name, if you're affiliated with an organization, if you're a resident, anything else you'd like to share with us on this rainy morning. Great, I'm going to jump right in. So today we're going to talk about what happens after the voting process in a participatory budgeting initiative. And we'll explore together how participatory budgeting can contribute to sustained power shifts in communities. So we're joined by 5 practitioners of participatory budgeting in Rhode Island. And in a nutshell, participatory budgeting, which I will also begin calling PB as we move forward, because it is a tongue twister, let me tell you. So I'm not referring to peanut butter, I'm referring to participatory budgeting if I say PB moving forward. PB is a democratic process where community members decide how to spend part of a budget, usually a public budget. PB started in Brazil in 1989 as an anti-poverty strategy. And since then, schools, cities, states, and governments of all shapes and sizes have implemented participatory budgeting processes. If you are interested in learning a bit more about some of the initiatives that you're going to hear discussed today, we invite you to watch a Fresh Fridays that we did in December of 2022, which you can find on our website, and Ali will link in the chat, where we really talk about the mechanics of participatory budgeting. What does it mean to actually create that system for this democratic process? Today, we're going to focus a little bit less on the mechanics and more on the potential for impact in communities. So to get us started, I am going to introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to jump right into questions. So first, I'd like to introduce Manny Ramos. You know, on a wave, Manny is an English teacher at Central Falls High School. Manny also teaches a participatory budgeting class. It's a semester-long class, which is nicknamed Warriors for Change, which happens every year at Central Falls High School, where 9th through 12th graders design a PB project to allocate $10,000. So we'll hear much more about that moving forward. I'd also like to introduce Becky Marcus, who is an assistant program officer at 𝐁𝐫𝐞𝐚, Rhode Island. Becky and her colleagues convene the Pawtucket-Central Falls Health Equity Zone and are currently implementing a participatory budgeting process called Together We Can, where residents in Pawtucket and Central Falls get to decide how they will spend $385,000 for projects in their community. I would also like to welcome Bree Lemieux, who is the Accountable Entity Program Lead for the Rhode Island Executive Office of Health and Human Services, and she serves on the implementation committee for the 9 Neighborhood Fund, which is a participatory budgeting initiative located in the 9 neighborhoods of Central Providence, the 02908 and 02909 zip codes, which will be allocating $1 million towards community projects. Fourth, I would like to introduce Dominique Resendez, the Associate Director of Community Infrastructure at One Neighborhood Builders. Dominique and other members of our team have been working on the 9 Neighborhood Fund, working closely with Bree and others to advance this initiative in the 9 neighborhoods of Central Providence. And fifth and finally, I would like to introduce Wilma Smith, who is a change agent and implementation committee member for Together We Can, the participatory budgeting initiative in Pawtucket Central Falls, who's been working very closely with Becky Marcus on that initiative. I'm going to start the conversation with Manny. So Manny, I know the school year just started. I'm sure you're in the thick of it, and we appreciate you taking time out of your Friday morning to join us. The Central Falls High School participatory budgeting class has been taking place for the last 4 years. You've been teaching it for 3 years, and you've seen dozens of students go through this process. Can you kick it off for us by just sharing some of the themes or trends that you've seen in terms of what it really looks like to turn these projects that students identify into action?
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. So I think the first thing that I would love to share is that when the class starts, typically students don't believe that we have real money, and they are like kind of reluctant to believe that they could make a change in the school. But we've been very excited to kind of get to see a wider picture of everything and see how that plays out over a few years. Students, I think, are generally they find it challenging to really see how they can impact areas of need in our school. And something that's been really great, something that I've really enjoyed and loved a lot, is that we have a lot of support from our school leaders, our local community leaders, and local politicians. So they have been very open to having students visit them, to participating in panels, to joining the class, and getting to talk to us a lot about what's happening, what the students are learning about, and answering questions that students really have. And so the greatest thing that I think has come out of the class is not just that we get to spend that $10,000 at the end of every school year and see their projects come to fruition, but just that like suddenly they are in the room with a community leader or a politician, and they get to ask them questions and they get to hear directly from them. And they also get to see that they're also like humans, right? They're other people who maybe also went to a high school that was similar to this, and that is something that is certainly a possibility for them in the future. I don't know how many of my students are currently way more civically involved, but I know that when they leave the class, they're excited about seeing what else they can do and seeing how they've affected our school. And the other thing that I really love is just that I think it builds a lot of community for us. We get to spend a lot of time in class together. Pam Jennings, who's in the other video you guys shared, I love Pam. She's my colleague. She co-teaches with me. Pam and I, like, make sure that the kids are well fed. We make sure that they like really enjoy our class, that they feel like their voices really matter with us. And so it's really great for us that those students like we try to build a home base for them, so that they can see what that might look like when it becomes like a school-wide thing.
Thank you so much. That's great. Yeah, well, don't worry, we'll come back to you. There's plenty more you can chime in and share, but that's a really great way to kick us off. And of course, the initiative that Manny leads is centered on reaching high school students. And I want to turn now to Becky and to Wilma, who are both working in Pawtucket-Central Falls on the initiative that is aimed at folks of all ages and residents across these two neighboring cities. So I was hoping I could start with Wilma, who I know you serve on the implementation committee for this initiative, which means you're working with others to figure out how do we actually take these ideas that folks decided were the right ideas for our community and make them happen. So I'm wondering, Wilma, if you can talk a little bit, feel free to introduce yourself a little bit, and then would love to hear what are some things that like surprised you about going through this process or that you learned about yourself or others?
Yeah, so I'm Wilma. I became part of this through the HES with Becky, and some of the things I guess that surprised me is how culturally diverse the process was. Like, it was very culturally diverse, and I didn't expect that there was a lot of residents in the area that were kind of like interested in being involved in something like this. And that was one thing that really surprised me. The other thing I would say is that it always surprised me when there's like a large community interest in something, because I've been doing a lot of like advocacy work around like housing and stuff like that in the community here, and I have not always seen that. So to see the number of people and the number of youth especially involved in this project has been amazing.
Thank you so much. That's really just very cool to hear. And I would love to hear from Becky's perspective, being on the side of, really trying to coordinate and provide that infrastructure that allows for these initiatives to take shape. If there's anything that you would like to share about what surprised you or what you learned in working with Wilma and many of the other Pawtucket and Central Falls residents who have been collaboratively working to advance these initiatives.
So to piggyback off of what Wilma just said about that cultural diversity, I remember when we were formulating how are we going to have these committees that are going to be developing proposals that are multi-generational, multilingual. We were thinking, I wonder, should we put folks who speak the same language in the same committee? And one thing that was just really awesome was to hear from the steering committee and the residents, like, no, we are excited to really collaborate with people who speak different languages, who are different ages, who come from different backgrounds and cultures. And you really saw that kind of collaboration happening amongst the residents as they were developing the proposals out of the community ideas. And then having the chance to really sit down with the agency experts from the city, with community organizations, and share and learn, the inner workings of how does this all work. So that was terrific. And one other thing that surprised me was really a testament to Manny's work in the high school. When we did voting in the high school, I was so astounded because we were in the cafeteria and the kids would come down for lunch in, these 45-minute chunks. And we'd hand them the ballots at their tables and say, we have a new participatory budgeting process. Or, sometimes we'd say that in Spanish, right, to the students. And because of Manny's work with Warriors for Change, the second we said participatory budgeting, they were excited and they were talking at their tables and they were discussing which projects they wanted to vote for. And I think that is really a testament to like what it takes to embed an understanding in like a school or an institution that, oh, we do this all the time. We have the power to decide how we invest money here. So that was really uplifting.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're already moving into this conversation, I feel like, about how kind of consistently demonstrating that there's opportunities to make change in your community and really creating a pathway to do that is like unlocks so many perspectives and interests that folks might have in continuing to improve their communities. I'd like to talk with Dominique and Bree now. So Dominique, I'm going to start with you. Given One Neighborhood Builders' role as the backbone for the Central Providence Opportunities Health Equity Zone, which has led the 9 Neighborhood Fund, our version of the participatory budgeting initiative. I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the activities that you and the team led to really effectively engage residents and try to ultimately shift power and decision-making throughout the participatory budgeting process.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just apologies in advance. I have a little bit of a cold, which like, it could be worse, but thanks for everybody for bearing with me. So interestingly enough, at One Neighborhood Builders, we had a little bit of experience in distributing funds that were resident-led. We had an initiative called the Community Impact Fund, where residents of our Resident Advisory Council actually had a pool of around $200,000 to distribute in grants to community organizations or individual residents who had ideas for a community-based project. And so over a few months of putting out a public RFP, reviewing proposals and deliberating, the RAC granted a little over $100,000 in small $5,000 grants. And so these projects included driveway repairs for home-based childcare providers, street outreach for folks who are unhoused. And there was this remaining pool of money because it was $200,000 and there was this $100,000 left. And there was a lot of discussion with the Resident Advisory Council on, do we do another round of this Community Impact Fund, or do we do instead participatory budgeting, where instead of the Resident Advisory Council making the decision how pool money is spent, we expanded out to the broader community. And it was kind of like this great timing of right as we were having these conversations over here, EOHHS and Rhode had put out this request for proposals for participatory budgeting. So it was like one of those really cool moments of like, if it's meant to be, it'll be. And I think that I think that what PB is all about effectively engaging residents to shift power and move that community decision making. PB provided us an opportunity to take those lessons learned through the Community Impact Fund and expand the decision-making role, right? Not only are folks, deciding on RFPs, but on the process itself, who can submit ideas, who can vote, the resident, the steering committee for participatory budgeting. And I see Nada on here, who was a member of that steering committee. Hi, Nada. And, thinking about like, what is the voting age? And, having that voting age be 13, right? As a way to kind of start getting young people involved in the civic process in a, instead of voting on a person who like you hope will implement ideas that you think are important, you actually get to directly vote on that project. And through, now that we're kind of in the implementation phase, we've been able to do some evaluation work and have some focus groups with our steering committee members, with our project delegates, to get insight into what worked and what could be improved, especially around this, collective decision-making. And, and I think that a lot of the feedback was really helpful for, for the participatory budgeting process, but I think it could be expanded into any type of, anything around power and decision making. So, what are the decisions that like actually felt most impactful for folks, right? Like what are the, and what were the, were there decisions that, folks wish that they had more power over in this process? What were the ones that they were like, wow, we spent a lot of time on this one decision that like I wish we had more time for others. And so I think that this, has really been overall just a really good learning experience for us on how, we as a health equity zone kind of integrate more of this kind of participatory governance and decision making into not only, funding, but like other parts of our work.
Thank you so much, Dominique. And you're nicely segueing us into this broader conversation about like kind of now what, now that we have these processes have been implemented, of course, Manny's class at Central Falls High School is annually, but these two other processes in the Pawtucket-Central Falls Health Equity Zone and the Central Providence Health Equity Zone, how do we learn from them, and what kind of application do they have for continuing to support civic action and communities moving forward? I want to ask Bree a question that's sort of tangentially related to that. So I know, Bree, you have this vantage point of being on the implementation committee for the 9 Neighborhood Fund, and also working at the Executive Office of Health and Human Services for the state, which is a tremendous partner in the work of the health equity zones and of these participatory budgeting initiatives specifically. Could you just talk a little bit about your experience on the implementation committee, and just from your vantage point, as you look ahead, what some opportunities are for us to sort of learn from this work and apply it, more broadly moving forward?
Sure. Thank you so much. So my experience has been nothing short of wonderful from the very beginning phase of PB, which was over a year ago now, which is crazy to think about. But it's been really impactful and an inspirational process, watching just the dedication and energy and effort that everyone involved has put in, and watching these ideas collected from the community grow and progress into really full-fledged projects that are now going to be implemented. So when I was asked to join the 9 Neighborhood Committee, there was really no hesitation to accept my role as state representation. One of the main reasons why we at 𝐂HHS decided to run the PB process through the health equity zones and their supporting agencies, such as One Neighborhood, is because they already have that established community infrastructure and existing community relationships, and they really truly understand the value of health equity. So I think it's just imperative to continue to build upon and progress the relationship between state agencies and community-based organizations, and just enable those types of collaborations in order to successfully address and continue to address these health-related social needs for our Medicaid beneficiaries. It's also a learning experience for us here at the state as well. It's the first time we've done a project like this, and it can really help us identify where we should prioritize funding and investing prospectively, so we can continue to address improving these SDOH needs.
Thank you so much, Bree, and appreciate you kind of wearing your multiple hats there. And it's great to just hear how the state is thinking about how can we use public dollars in slightly more creative ways that really center residents of communities across the state. And I think it's been, based on what everyone has shared here today, a really tremendous kind of step in a really great direction. I want to turn back to Manny now. So I'm going to say you're the pro here. You've been doing this for a few years in working with students in Central Falls High School. I want to talk kind of about the implementation of the projects themselves. So maybe if you can give folks who are on the call here a few examples of the kinds of projects that students have voted for over the years. And then can you talk about some of the successes and the challenges of trying to turn these ideas into reality?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. We have had the class run 3 years already, and will be our 4th year. In the first year, the $10,000 were spent on bathroom renovations. So just trying to update the student facilities. That was like implemented right away, because it was definitely an area of need for the school. But one of the things that's been really great is that that year students also proposed new water fountains with filters in the school. And so although the money was spent on the bathroom renovations, the school spent the money to also purchase some of those filters. And so we've had this really great and like lucky, but maybe not lucky, because once you bring to the attention of people the problems that students are finding, they should bring solutions. So it's been really fortunate for us that although our projects are being funded, it's also making change in other areas of the school. Because again, once students are like noticing things and pointing things out and asking for them to be fixed, it's a disservice to them if those things aren't addressed. Our second year, students they voted for a menu board in the cafeteria. And the menu board just looks like if you walk into a Dunkin' Donuts or like a McDonald's, it's just a digital menu. And the idea was that as they were doing their data analysis and their like interviews and talking to other students about where they wanted to see change happen, a lot of them spoke about lunch. And they met with our school cafeteria people, Ryan Hurley, who's amazing. They met with Ryan, and Ryan immediately took all of their feedback and started making changes right away. And so what they found was that not that the cafeteria staff didn't want to feed them really great food, but that they didn't know what the kids wanted. And so the purpose of the menu board is supposed to first like actually show kids what their options are, and second, give students like a survey that they can take to provide feedback on the food they're having. And we were, again, really fortunate that once the company that operates our cafeteria, once they saw that students wanted to see change, they made a bunch of changes too. They did a bunch of renovations for the cafeteria as well. So we got to launch a new cafeteria or a renovated cafeteria because they brought attention just to the menu and just to like what people were and weren't eating. That same year, we didn't end up spending all of the $10,000. So we got to fund two more projects, some new furniture for the library, a student space in the library. Again, we've been really excited just to see how these seemingly small ideas can turn into something that is affecting the whole school in lots of different ways. And for students, it's really great because even when their project isn't the one that's selected by the student body, there's still a potential for them to see it through, for them to see something happen in the school because they want to address our needs and our problems. This last year in the spring, they voted for to upgrade the rest of the water fountains in the school. And that is a place where we've had some problems. I think this is like where our first real big obstacle has come, is that in Central Falls, we're very excited to be getting a new high school soon. And so there's just a lot of red tape around what projects the school is really excited, and the district and the community is really excited for us to implement. So we don't have new water fountains yet, but they're on their way. But it would have been nice to have happened over the summer, right? And we've had kind of behind the scenes conversations about where I should be kind of trying to push students, like what directions, especially because if we're getting a new building, like, do we need to address certain things here? And yes, of course we do. And so I have had like huge hesitation there, because I want the students who are currently here to also have a really great experience in their school, not just thinking about the students who will have a brand new school in the future. Another obstacle that we encounter is that because of all of the contracts that people get into, like the menu board for the cafeteria, for example, is just like a giant TV. And any one of us could walk into a Walmart and buy a giant TV for like maybe $1,000, maybe $500, but we have to buy the very specific one that the company needs us to get. And so it becomes really difficult to get to really play around with the budgets, because at the end of the day, $10,000 is not that much money when you start looking at how expensive making big changes can be. I'm just looking at my notes really
Thank you
quick,
so
but
much. And
yeah.
I bet you're a lot of students' favorite teacher. I'm just gonna venture to guess that based on because it sounds pretty fun to me. I would love to do this in high school. I love that you're starting to move into this conversation about some of the challenges. And one of the things that you were highlighting there is that, you know, just whatever the most brilliant idea is, there's still sort of usually a set of processes or structures that have to be navigated to make it happen. And that in and of itself can be an eye-opening experience for folks who are really engaged in this kind of process for the first time. I'm going to open it up to all the rest of our panelists, because both the Together We Can and the Neighborhood Fund are at this stage of having had, you know, the vote a few months ago for projects in their communities and are now working to move forward with some of these projects. Maybe I could ask for folks to share, you know, one thing that's going really well and maybe one thing that is a challenge that is emerging, and whoever would like to go first.
I could go first. I think one thing that's been really, you know, so for us at One Neighborhood Builders and the 9 Neighborhood Fund, we are putting together a structure where we have an implementation committee that provides general oversight over all of the projects, you know, and that is what, you know, Bree is on. And then each project has its own subcommittee. And so, you know, it's been really exciting that the project delegates that put together the projects have an interest in sitting on these subcommittees to really see these projects through, so that not only are they saying like, gee, wouldn't it be great to have a bathroom at Moreno Park, but now they actually get to be part of like making that happen. I think what is challenging is that you're doing a participatory budgeting process that is so exciting in these really slow systems. And so I think balancing, community engagement, right, and resident-led and resident participation with like, you know, these slower systems and being realistic about timelines. And, you know, we had kind of some reflections in our implementation committee meeting about like, what is the biggest lesson that folks would bring into this year? And everybody was in separate groups, but everybody basically had the same feedback of being realistic with our timelines. And so I think that there's so much excitement and there's so much energy in getting, you know, moving these projects ahead, but you want to make sure that they're moving ahead in a way that is still resident-led and centers community. And that can really be in conflict sometimes, and it can be really challenging to hold space for both of those things.
Thank you, Dominique.
I'd be happy to share. So the residents of Pawtucket and Central Falls voted to implement a splash pad water park and outdoor exercise equipment. And we were really excited about this when the residents were designing the splash pad project. Pawtucket Parks and Rec had said, you know, we've been looking at John Street Park for a while, really hoping to do like a glow up in that park. If you're familiar, Payne Park in Pawtucket has gone under quite a transformation. And there's kind of new landscaping, new splash pad there. And the city was kind of saying, you know, that kind of thing is actually something we've also been looking to kind of replicate in John Street Park, and then kind of bringing that conversation back to residents, looking at the map and really looking at the demographics in that area. Like, is there other green space around? And there really quite isn't. So, and then when we're thinking about community safety too. So similarly to what Manny was talking about, with that interest and partnership and buy-in from the city, the idea became more than just installing a splash pad, but the city also making their own efforts to do a more, you know, major renovation of this park to kind of build from that momentum. To to that, there's also challenges with just what Dominique was saying, just timeline, moving parts coming together as a project grows and gets more complex, and really trying to maintain that communication and accountability with all of the residents that voted on the project. The second project that won the second most, received the second most votes for implementation was a multimedia mental health and the stigma campaign. And Wilma is on the implementation committee for this campaign. I'll say briefly some of what I think, and then I'll pass it off to you, Wilma. But, you know, we're kind of just right now pulling together all the pieces, right, of like, what are the entities we can be working with to source input from artists on these different media, and kind of figuring out ways we can do that is as like community based as possible, participatory as possible, representative, really, but you know, and also like really high quality art and stuff like that. So I think we're just kind of building that together. Yeah, if you have anything to add, Wilma, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say exactly what Dominique said about like the timeline. That's kind of like the hardest thing with the implementation phase. But as Becky was talking about with the mental health campaign, it's even harder because like now you have to look for other people or other agencies who can help, you know, push this campaign forward. So not only are you sticking to your timeline to implement the project, but you also have to collaborate with those other agencies and make sure it's in line with, you know, what you're trying to do. And sometimes that can be a little frustrating from like the resident perspective and the community perspective, because it's like, well, it won, we need to get it out there, we need to do it, but everything takes time. So, and you want to make sure that you're putting out something that's going to be concrete and solid, and you know, goes along with the original idea that was proposed. So I guess those are the challenges.
Thank you so much. And I want to give Bree a chance to answer this question too, if there's anything that comes to mind. But I also want to note, after Bree responds, we're going to open it up for folks who are here on the call to ask questions. So start getting those questions ready. Bree, anything you'd like to add on challenges or things that have went really well?
Yes, just to back what everyone said as far as the timeline, on the state side as well, because of funding wise, we have these guidelines, obviously for fiscal year, we have to get funding through the time frame. So there's a lot of amending that we had to do because we came to the realization that this was not going to be done within, I think it was September 30th, 2023. So tomorrow, that was not going to happen. So we had to extend, you know, that funding through fiscal year 2024 to 2025. So yeah, the time frame on our end as well has been difficult. And I think another challenge would probably be at the beginning phase, as far as like making sure these projects weren't disallowable, because they are, it's federally funded. So we have a lot of different guidelines that made it a little bit harder and stricter to implement what we wanted. So I became the bad guy in certain situations where I was like, oh, we can't do that, guys. But everyone took it very well. I would say those probably were the only two top challenges on the state side for us.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Allie Steinberg, who will facilitate this Q&A section.
Awesome. Thanks, Grace, and thanks everyone. I definitely learned a lot about the PB process through this conversation. So really grateful. If anyone wants to leave some questions or come off mute to ask a question out loud, this is the time to do so. So yeah, let's get some questions. While the questions are coming in, I'm going to ask a question. So this is for anyone who wants to chime in. So given what you all have learned through being part of a PB process, what do you think we can take from this process and apply more broadly to participatory decision-making processes? So we heard a little bit how like Manny's work in the schools kind of laid the groundwork. So then when the PCF participatory budgeting process came in, students were primed and ready. So like, what do you think we can take from this process and apply more broadly? If we could have one or two folks chime in on that.
I would say, the whole thing when you're looking at the participatory budgeting process is just like, the importance of community involvement and community engagement. You want people to feel like, this is for them. And I think when people see that and get a sense of that, I mean, at least I did with participating in it, it really makes you feel part of your community. It makes you feel like stronger to be able to do things and make those changes necessary. So I would just say, just continued advocacy for community involvement and community engagement.
I completely agree. I think so often when we do kind of community designed initiatives, right? There's often a lot of community engagement, sometimes on the front end. Like we'll do a broad-based community input, community needs assessment, or something like that. And then the participation often tends to narrow as we get closer and closer to project development, implementation, oversight. And something that is so awesome about PB is we go big and we go wide when we collect ideas from the community. And then we do kind of often narrow a little as we're really developing those proposals, but then we go big and wide again in the vote. And that was really impactful, going into public housing and reconnecting, right, with some of the same people who'd given us ideas, or the schools or the food pantries, right? So it showed that accountability, it deepened that connection, right? It was like, oh, I contributed an idea. And sometimes you can even see the way your own idea was reflected in the ballot. So I think that is a really huge piece. And the other thing is we saw such powerful leadership, engagement, and truly a sense of family, I would say, and motivation amongst our change agents who were developing the proposal, the steering committee, and just the community that got to come to vote parties or ice cream truck voting, etc. And I think something we're encountering now is a now what? We've built this momentum and the community is like kind of asking like, what's next? So really looking to how do we embed and institutionalize participatory budgeting processes, right, into the structure of our, whether it's, government at different levels, nonprofits, like kind of still figuring that out in schools, but how do we do it in a way that is sustainable, recurring, meaningful investments, right? The bigger impact you can have with the more money, that's really important because that really helps people dream and really show them we're actually investing real power in your voice. This is not tokenizing. And then also, what's the next step for those resident leaders, right? Is there a next step that they can learn about how to be civically engaged, even beyond their PB experience? Really investing in that resident leadership in a long-term way.
Awesome. That was great. I really appreciate that. Did anyone else want to chime in before we wrap up?
I just want to say one thing about a takeaway, and I think Manny was getting at this earlier, but for better or for worse, PB lifts the veil on processes, right? And the way that things work. And something that we kind of had to keep saying through this process is like, PB is not going to solve everything, right? But it can at least highlight where they're, it can at least lift the veil and show people what needs to be changed, and and adds that transparency. And so I think that there were some challenges that came up that like this specific piloted participatory budgeting process was not the place for that solution, but it provided, it at least acknowledged that this is a challenge, right? And that in order to make changes, you have to know what's wrong first. And I think that PB was really, successful in that. you know, in highlighting that.
Awesome. That I really appreciated that zooming out and thinking about how the what's next and how that's still being figured out a little bit. So want to thank all of our panelists and all of you all for joining, all of our audience members. And so we will post this recording on our website shortly so that you can revisit it and review the lessons. And we will be having our next Fresh Friday released shortly, so you'll be on the lookout for that. And just want to thank you all for joining and hope you have a great rest of your Friday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.